Hi, I'm Steve Scott. I've been a software developer and tech consultant for almost a quarter of a century. I've traveled around the globe to serve clients, where I've been responsible for building secure systems, hiring development teams, and solving complex problems through technology. With my toolbox of languages, platforms, frameworks, and APIs, I round up my technical experience with an academic background in mathematics and computer science. Penetration testing is a coordinated and simulated cyber attack used to evaluate the security of a computer system or network. The initial and critical planning phase of penetration testing is key to a successful engagement process. In this course, I'll discuss the fundamentals of penetration, including how to compare and contrast governance, risk, and compliance concepts that include regulatory compliance considerations, explore legal concepts such as service-level agreements, statement of work, non-disclosure agreements, and master service agreements. I'll also cover the importance of scoping and organizational customer requirements, including common standards and methodologies, rules of engagement, environmental considerations, defining target lists, and validating the scope of engagement. In this video, I'll present an overview of compliance considerations, including Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard (PCI DSS) and the General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR), and I'll use these as examples. In general, pen testing for compliance is a special case of pen testing, in that the additional requirements must be met. Regulatory requirements, government laws passed to protect data and protect users, is what drives most compliance considerations. The compliance requirements vary by jurisdiction, country by country, or region by region. If you operate in multiple jurisdictions, you may have additional compliance requirements to meet. But compliance is not always government-related. Industry itself often introduces its own compliance requirements, such as when handling financial data, like the PCI DSS for payment cards, along with government standards and policies. When data is breached, there may also be disclosure requirements, so that the compliance failure is released publicly for the sake of transparency. This can be damaging to an organization's reputation and lead to legal trouble as well, and of course the damage done to its customers, which is another reason why pen testing is essential for compliance. Pen testing can help or may be required to verify that the security measures put in place work as expected. The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, is an industry-mandated standard for handling credit card data and transactions. It's a compliance-based standard requiring compliance-based assessments. If an organization wants to accept credit card payments and interoperate with the credit card industry, they need to be PCI DSS compliant. Following the checklist of compliance items, the policies and regulations can be verified. What are some of the key requirements of PCI DSS? An organization needs to monitor and audit all access to credit card data, and restrictive access controls must be in place. And these must be checked and carried out with pen testing at least on a yearly basis to maintain compliance. Another example requirement is that antivirus software must be installed and running on all servers that interact with card data and user data, and it must be updated regularly. Access to physical hardware, servers, and backups is restricted, and the cardholder data environment, the CDE, must be isolated from the network. The PCI DSS security controls require that it must be protected by strong passwords, default passwords on any devices must be removed, and the cardholder data must be encrypted when transmitted, even between application servers and database servers. When it's in transit, it must be encrypted. This requires regular, at minimum yearly pen testing from internal and external sources to the network to simulate both internal and external threats. The General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is a European Union regulation covering EU citizens and residents regardless of where they are and regardless of the company they are interacting with. It's a compliance-based regulation and requires someone within the organization or in a direct relationship with the organization to act as the Data Protection Officer, or DPO. The DPO being an assigned contact in charge of GDPR compliance. and sometimes in large organizations, this person is a dedicated role. There are reporting and disclosure requirements, and this is a big part of GDPR. Article 12 of the GDPR gives people the right to transparent information. And Article 33 states that there must be a notification of a personal data breach to the supervisory authority. And Article 34 extends that to the data subject or persons affected by the data breach. So the users must be notified and notified transparently of what the cause of a breach is and when it happens. In general, meeting requirements for compliance with GDPR includes a lawful basis and transparency. So this is key. No data can be stored without consent. Records of consent must be saved and stored as well. And transparency means that the organization must communicate clearly regarding how the data is used and what, if any, third parties have access to the data. The GDPR spells out responsibilities in terms of accountability and governance, not just who controls the data, but also who and where the data is processed. And there's a standard 72-hour window of when a data breach occurs to when it is reported to the governing authorities. The protection of data, the security of it without negligence, and a duty to carry out impact assessments, especially with respect to new technology that may introduce greater data security risks. The impact on a user's privacy when new methods are introduced. The organization should seek advice and input from the data protection officer in these matters and be transparent about changes with its users. In terms of privacy rights, users have rights to rectification, rights to erasure, so the right to be forgotten, the right to restrict processing, the right to object, and there must be ways for the user to get all of the data that an organization has on them. And these are all required by compliance. In terms of penetration testing methodology, we look at things like the cardholder data environment coverage. So in pen testing, we're looking to ensure the security and personal restrictions with regard to networks and data centers. We look for industry-accepted pen testing approaches, such as NIST SP 800-115, which is the NIST publication titled Technical Guide to Information Security Testing and Assessment. Internal and external testing has to be considered, so how can security be breached from inside the network or outside of the common network? So it's a LAN versus WAN or internet environment. In most cases, VPN access can be considered internal for the purposes of pen testing and validate segmentation and scope reduction. How are key or critical components isolated and protected? By scope reduction, this can mean physically separated or by firewall or logical separation, depending on the use case, whatever might reduce the potential attack surface. Some more factors in penetration testing methodology include looking at the application layer. The applications or services running on a computer belonging to the organization or to third parties who have access to the organization's infrastructure. Looking at the network layer, each aspect or subnetwork, co-located facilities, hosting centers, cloud service providers. So a comprehensive pen test must consider many different areas and take into account the threat and vulnerability review of past attacks and exploits that may have occurred in or affected the organization in some way. And then the retention of pen testing and remediation results. Pen testing must result in documentation describing what was done, what was discovered, and recommendations about what needs to be remedied, so what needs to be fixed or changed or improved. What are the overarching considerations for meeting compliance? Well, as I mentioned, jurisdictions, in terms of legal and industry considerations, that must be met by the organization. Then we can consider the scope of pen testing, the breadth and depth of the coverage, which comes down to budget in most cases. Much of the budget, the costs involved in pen testing, comes down to meeting compliance. But comprehensive pen testing coverage and meeting all the best practices in terms of security can quickly widen the scope. Being able to state the scope, what might be missed based on the budget, is also important for the pen tester. Apart from the compliance and risk-based assessments and supply chain assessments, pen testing also covers team assessments, such as taking a red team versus blue team approach. So the red team assessment is conducted by internal testers, and the blue team assessment is assessing the IT support and administrators who defend the network. And that concludes this presentation on regulatory compliance considerations for pen testing.